Hello, welcome to another edition of One in Conversation. My name is Laura Ieraci, Assistant Editor of One magazine. Today we bring you a special interview with Sister Winifred Doherty, an NGO representative at the United Nations. She wrote a compelling witness for us in our previous issue of One magazine on human trafficking about her work of advocacy on the part of women and girls. Welcome, Sister Winifred. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me.
Sister, you've been working your entire life as a religious of the Good Shepherd to help women who have been at the margins of society, women who have been exploited or trafficked. What motivated you to join a religious community dedicated to this work?
Well, I love the question, Laura. And certainly when I look back 57 years, what motivated me to join the Sisters of the Good Shepherd and what motivates me today are totally different. So I say that to say that in the process of joining and learning and growing and developing, one changes. And so a rural Irish girl just completing secondary school education who joins the Sisters of the Good Shepherd is not the person that you have in front of you today. So I have to say that my choice, first of all, it always has to do with God and God's call. And so like the faith dimension and responding in terms of a call is hugely important. And that stays the same, while the response to the call might be very different. But in exploring where to be and how to be and with whom to be, I discovered in that process that I had a grandaunt and a cousin, my father's first cousin, who were both Good Shepherd sisters. One was a missionary in Sri Lanka back in the early 1900s. And my cousin, Sister Brina McCoy, was a nurse tutor in St. Martin's Hospital in Bangalore in India. And so when I was received as a novice in 1968, it was my first time meeting her, even though I was born before she left to join the sisters. So that'll tell you something. But when I heard that, I felt if they can do it, I can do it. And so it was a priest in a retreat who said to me, "It's Good Shepherd for you." And so, that's what the exploration showed up. And the other confirming aspect to it was, in those days, I loved white habits. And when the literature came, the Sisters of the Good Shepherd had a white habit. So God has God's ways, both in the family history, I believe, in the history of my own personal trying to grasp and know who God is and how God calls and how to make a response. Now, the response in those days, just post-Vatican II, was a very different experience of responding to now being in this 21st century where the global issues impact us tremendously. And so it's no longer fleeing the world, which was part of pre-Vatican, but now it's immersion in the world. And look, Pope Francis puts it lovely, are you smelling the sheep? And is that smell part of who you are? And I think that's the call that I'm responding to.
Wonderful. Can you share with us what kind of work that response to the call led you to prior to coming to the United Nations? What kind of work were you doing, Sister?
Well, I suppose in my early years, I was doing whatever was happening in the Good Shepherd Convent in Limerick, where we were working with girls and women. And then I trained as a social worker. And from that, then I was working with adolescent girls. And to my, I don't know what way to put it in terms of a call, but I received another call, which I wasn't very welcoming of at the time, which was a call to be in formation work. And so for me to leave active ministry and move into something that I wasn't quite comfortable with. But anyway, I worked in formation work for over 20 years, believe it or not, 8 years in Ireland. And then I continued that work in Ethiopia, where I was a missionary for 16 years, working mostly in the formation work, but also having a lot of contact, and certainly in the last few years of being in Ethiopia, being more engaged in community development and work with women and girls in terms of empowerment projects and income generating. And very important for me was also a ministry of being on the street at night, so as to meet women and girls who were being prostituted. And so those are what I say, the significant moments that have influenced me in the person I am today. But also, let me say, between going to Ethiopia and leaving Ireland, I did take a sabbatical in the Philippines at the East Asian Pastoral Institute. And really, that was the beginning of a much more open-minded, understanding, culturally sensitive approaches. So this was tremendously influential in my life, together with the opportunities to meet our sisters in ministry throughout all of Asia. All of the countries I was privileged to visit and be a guest of the sisters who spared nothing in ensuring that I was immersed in their ministries, ministries to women in prostitution, ministries to women who were trafficked, ministries to people in poverty, ministries to the girl child, and including ministries in formation. So all of that has contributed to I coming here. And I was in Ethiopia and was quite happy when I got a nudge from my provincial superior in Ireland to maybe consider this application for the position of the a sister to represent at the United Nations. Sister Claire Nolan was already here ahead of me and had done 12 years.
Can you share with us what you do now at the United Nations? What's involved in your responsibilities there?
Well, Good Shepherd Sisters have special consultative status at the United Nations. And we gained that in 1996. And believe it or not, I was in Ethiopia during those days. And in 1998, I was actually asked to be a representative to the Economic Commission in Africa on behalf of the sisters in Africa and the Middle East. So that maybe was the beginning of a little introduction to the United Nations. So we, excuse me, we have special consultative status because of our expertise with girls, women, and children. And the United Nations 27 years ago is very different to the United Nations we have today. The world has changed. The issues have changed. Our understanding of the issues have changed. And so Good Shepherd Sisters in these years, and with my predecessor, Sister Claire Nolan, she, based on her experience, compiled and consulted throughout the whole congregation on what kind of positions we should take with regard to our special consultative status. And so it ended up that we have 6 position papers. And those position papers have to do with economic justice, with migration, with the girl child, with trafficking, with a paper specifically dedicated to addressing the issue of prostitution. My day-to-day work is really about being engaged in those issues, oftentimes in a head space. But the head space has to be informed by the heart space. And so the heart space is the compassion, is the mercy, is indeed hearing the cry of the poor, of the earth, of women, of girls, of children, and trying to take every conceivable opportunity that we can get to bring that voice to the United Nations, to have it spoken, to have it written, and to do whatever informal meeting with member states, with the ambassadors, with their delegations, to seek to bring about the change that we all desire, and to say, in some senses, look, this is a good program, this works well, we should do more of this, how can you help us, will we bring this forward?
Which area would you say, or which areas would you say are most urgent right now in trying to improve the status of women and children in the world today?
Well, where I sit today, there's a sense in which my heart is very heavy because of the horrendous global conflicts that are happening. Certainly, I never experienced or expected to experience a war in Europe. And now we have, you know, the beginnings of a war in the Middle East. We have the horrendous suffering of peoples. I've spoken to you about, you know, poverty and human trafficking and climate, but we can do none of this if we don't have peace. And so while my brief at the United Nations is not to engage with the Security Council, that has its own accreditations and its own way of engagement, it's peace we need. And I suppose in some senses, this came up, excuse me, last July when we were evaluating the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals 7 years into the process. You know, we're halfway to 2030. And so it was a very disappointing and dismal picture compared to the hope that I have tried to share with you that was and is and must be a part of our work as we continue, even though these days are dark and are conflict-ridden, not just the 2 big areas that I've spoken about, but throughout Africa, there's conflict after conflict after conflict. And it's difficult to know what to do, how be people of peace. So we're caught in a huge struggle, and it's in that struggle we can't lose hope. And so, you know, the light of Christ is within. We are the light of Christ. Jesus has said, I am the way. Jesus himself ended up crucified on the cross in a non-violent stance. The violence was done to him, but the violence did not bring about the end of Jesus. There was the moment of resurrection. And so somewhere in this global struggle of humanity, of power, of aggression, and of suffering. Christ is crucified every day. I know that I have been reading and trying to follow the breakdown of what was very promising development in Ethiopia, the whole province of Tigray, the humanitarian distress, the people moving out, and more recently reading of conflict between the various tribal groups. And so there's a sense in which the world seems to be passing through this moment of crisis. So for me, there's something about how we be in this struggle. And so compassionate hearts, merciful hearts, open minds, how embrace diversity, how be in solidarity with the people who are most suffering. And so for me, as this religious woman, while I look at all this on media and I read it in the papers and I come to work saying, what more can I do? It's in the prayer moment of bringing all this distress, this cry of humanity to God, and just crying with humanity for sanity to return, for peace to prevail on earth. Even the words of Mary's Magnificat have been informing me. He cast down the mighty from their thrones.
Mm-hmm.
There's a sense in which something is happening in this struggle. The mighty are being cast down, but the mighty won't leave aside very easily, and so the struggle. And I think this is Pope Francis, has been, I think, a man of the moment and a man of the issues of this time. So that explains something of where I stand in the midst of all this. And like, we can have our little plans and our schemes to make things better, have social protection, have sanitation, different small things. Housing is a big issue here at the United Nations through another NGO, shelter for people, the migration, but the bigger picture is the need to address conflict and live in peace.
Sister, you're working at the international level. You're able to speak with people from different countries, different NGOs. Most of us don't have those opportunities. How can we, in our local communities, our local parishes, how can we be better peacemakers? How can we enter into the goals that you've articulated to bring about greater peace, but also to bring about greater justice? Going back to the topic of your work on women and children, how can we at the local level take part in these missions?
That there are two sides of the one coin, if you like, and that if it's not happening at the local level, the implementation of some of the big agendas, well, then the engagement that I might have as a representative is falling short. And so at the local level, I think I very much encourage people to know about, in today's world, the Sustainable Development Goals. And I say that because every country practically has committed to and has provided to the United Nations over the past 7 years 2 and sometimes 3 reports on what they're doing in their country. Now, when it came to asking a question from the floor, from the NGO to the government, what's there isn't always done, so that's something else. But so for people at the local level, get to know where your government is in this SDG scenario. And in that, SDG 5 is gender equality. And so you have in there everything you would want in terms of the well-being of women and girls. From the first big thing is to end violence. And in there, in that violence, I'm talking about what we don't hear a whole lot about sometimes is domestic violence in the family. And when we don't know about it, it means it's not spoken about. So it's a silent thing that's happening, a violence that's happening that nobody speaks about. So break the silence. Sometime I heard, I think it was when Kofi Annan was, oh no, not Kofi Annan, Ban Ki-moon was Secretary General, something from India about ring the bell. So if people in their neighborhood heard shouting or heard violence happening between a man and a woman, they all took up their bell and rang it. And so, break the silence. So we can organize campaigns. So one cannot work alone. You have to look for who else is engaged in this and work on campaigns. Zero tolerance of violence, zero tolerance of child marriage, zero tolerance of domestic violence. So no to violence. And so begin this talk in the local community. Now, for me, one of the big breakthroughs in Good Shepherd has been girls coming forward who are actually engaging in the UN agenda, girls in school, in high school. And they are the most fierce advocates you could meet. And they come with their knowledge, with their facts, with what happens in their country, what happens in their home, and the changes they're going to make. And they're not behind the door in speaking out. So, and in doing that, they are already sensitizing and educating the community. And very often, let me say, educating us. Sometimes that are the adults that are closed and maybe think, well, children shouldn't be talking and children shouldn't be heard, but these girls are speaking up and speaking out. So speak up, speak out, get into a network. You can't take on everything. I heard a girl from Latin America on the International Day of the Girl. She was from a Good Shepherd program. And she spoke about doing research on the issues against the girl child in her country. And researching it and looking at it and then saying, what will we do about it? So it takes a leader. The leader needs to connect with other people. And not just other people, but a wider group of people. Because we cannot do anything on our own any longer. We must be networked and interconnected.
You've mentioned so many obstacles there. Are there any improvements, any advances that we can celebrate together in the past 20 years or so during our conversation? What would you highlight as some of the advances we could celebrate?
Well, I think the International Day of the Girl and the work we have been doing is one big kudos. I have worked very hard in terms of universal social protection. And, it's certainly within the lingo of the United Nations, yet half the people of the world don't have access even to one social protection. I think I have highlighted the whole, surely the glass ceiling with regard to gender equality has indeed been broken, but we need more push to get up there in terms of the rest of us. The Sustainable Development Goals, marvelous moments. And behind the scenes, I mentioned about conflict resolution and what happens behind the scenes. I think with all of the NGOs throughout the world, there are small projects that are living every day the hope and the dream in a kind of reality of what we have spoken about here. Certainly, I know when I visit any of our ministries, I hear people speaking in an empowered way. And so it has to do with putting the resources, not into war, but into the building up of each other and of our nations and our countries. So there's much to celebrate. I think every day, in some senses, is a celebration, even though it brings the pain of the day. But the celebration, the sun rises, the sun sets, the assurance that God walks with us, not on our good days, but more importantly, maybe in our down days when we don't experience it, and when it's sheer faith and sheer hope only that believes that God is in this moment of suffering and of pain. So holding aloft the gospel, holding aloft the trust towards resurrection, towards new life, and towards well-being for everybody, that is to be celebrated.
Sister, your passion for your vocation, for your work, for your ministry is very moving. And I'm wondering if you could look back at your years as a religious of the Good Shepherd, what have been the graces for you?
In some senses, I might laugh at it today and say, what were the graces? But I say, now it was grace all the way. You can say the grace in terms of how I responded, not just in terms of the initial call, but throughout the years. Grace in terms of good health to be able to engage this ministry. Grace in terms of the many, many people I have met and have enriched my life, the opportunities that have been given to me by the congregation in terms of education, in terms of travel, in terms of taking on this work. And so, there's a sense, I think, in which I kind of say, well, now at this time of my life, everything is grace. And, even in the dire situation that we are thrust into, I think sometimes I say, should I be feeling guilty because I am living, upper class lifestyle, I'm not standing in a line waiting for water for half the day, or standing waiting for an exit to open that never opens day in, day out, starving for food, wondering where the next meal will come from. So there's a sense in which when I look at my life and the privileges associated with it, it's all grace. But I think where I try to manage is to always be on the side of people in poverty, on the side of people suffering, to try to earnestly hear that cry and to lament with them, while also not losing faith. And yes, we have to struggle, but we're on the journey, and the journey is to resurrection, to a different way of being, not just in the next life, but here now with each other, in relationship, in care, in sisterhood, in brotherhood.
Sister, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to speak with you today. I hope our viewers will read more about the ins and outs of your work and advocacy at the United Nations. But thank you very much for speaking with us today. And God bless you in your ongoing ministry and your ongoing work. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Laura. It has been my privilege and a great moment of reflection. So thank you for offering me that. Thank you.